Hello, my name is Ari Kotler, and I am the host of Different on Sleepy Hollow Radio. On this show, you are introduced to incredible people who have overcome profound challenges in order to become successful. In this third installment of Different, my guest is the amazing Mr. Steve Slavin. Mr. Slavin hails from England and is 5 hours ahead of us. Mr. Steve Slavin was a professional musician, songwriter, and record producer for 25 years. He later ventured into the world of TV advertising, where he wrote music and created promotional videos for companies such as Disney Pixar, GlaxoSmithKline, Unilever, and Paramount Films. In 2008, at the age of 48, he was diagnosed with high-functioning autism. He had struggled with depression and OCD since early childhood and always knew there was something more going on than those two conditions. The autism diagnosis helped provide the answers. Steve now works as a filmmaker and is the author of 2 books about autism and mental health, Looking for Normal and Timothy Blossom, Officially Brilliant. Mr. Slavin has had a very interesting life that will resonate with a lot of our listeners. It's a complete honor for me to have Mr. Steve Slavin as my guest today. Mr. Slavin, welcome, and thank you so much for appearing on my show.
Thank you, Ari. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. This, I think, is going to be a great interview. I'm so happy to have you on the show. So I read your book, Timothy Blossom, Officially Brilliant, and your autobiography entitled Looking for Normal. I noticed that there were a lot of similarities between the two. How do you think they compare?
The Looking for Normal is completely based on my life growing up and how I got to where I did. Timothy Blossom would come under a work of fiction, but actually it's based on pure fact. A lot of it is autobiographical. A lot of it is also based on the observations I've made of working with many, many young people on the spectrum over the last 14 years. So Timothy Blossom really is a composite character of all the young people and actually older people on the spectrum. So Timothy Blossom really is a real character, just lots of other people's characters.
You mentioned that you were working with young people over the past 14 years. What does that entail?
Okay, so when I was diagnosed with autism in 2008, I gave up my career in the music business and in the advertising business. And I was, I'd been doing everything for a long time. So I wanted a change of career, something that suited how I felt about myself at the time. So I actually became a filmmaker, which I still do, which is one day a week. I work as a specialist tutor for the National Autistic Society, which is the UK's largest autism charity. So I work as a tutor and I work on, we make films. It's at a day centre. And so each day they have a different tutor come in. Somebody may do art or music, and I do filmmaking and sort of media studies. So I've got to work with so many people on the spectrum from all ages and all abilities as well. And that's how I felt. I mean, I learned an awful lot about myself through working with them. And out of that came Timothy Blossom. I can actually pick out all of his traits amongst the people I've worked with and also my own experiences of growing up.
Wow, that's real cool. I bet it must be a pleasure to work with kids that you really want to help. So I want to go back to the beginning of your life. I want to ask about your delay in speech. What was that like?
Do you know when you have a delay in speech, I don't think you know that you have it sometimes.
Yeah, until your parents tell you.
Yeah, which my mum...
Which happened to me.
Yeah, exactly, with my mum. I suppose I could say over shoulder. I mean, a couple of months after I was diagnosed with autism, she passed away. Oh. And it was just time for her to give her analysis to the psychologist of my development as a child. And I always knew that I had speech problems, but, she she reminded me many times over the years, and to the psychologist who did the diagnosis, that I didn't actually speak till I was around 6.
And you would think that would be a tip-off.
Yeah, do you know, I'm just not very good at joining the dots sometimes. I mean, there were some really large dots that I didn't join. I always knew there were lots of things going on developmentally with me. You don't always know what the sum total of those things mean. And because, you know, I'd always suffered from very early on with anxiety and OCD and depression, I just thought everything was a combination of those conditions. Yeah.
I wanted to know something else because you mentioned from a young age you were having problems. What made you first aware that you were different?
Oh, very early on. I think it was, I mean, we are talking about the early to mid 60s here, so a long time ago. And there were very different attitudes to, you know, mental health in those days. It really was a thing to be brushed under the carpet. You know, you didn't really, if you had a child that had mental health problems or some sort of any kind of disability, really, you know, I don't know what it's like in the States, but over here in the suburbs, people tended to brush those things under the carpet.
I think it was like worldwide it happened. We had institutions here, we've had mental hospitals, and they've been pretty bad for some people. Yeah. They've started off well-meaning and then they changed into prison-like facilities.
Well, yeah, I mean, I expect it was just a sign of the times, really. So I knew that I was the child with problems, and I grew up feeling as though I was the child with problems, and my parents, their friends, and the neighbors, everyone would, you know, you were in that category as one of those problem children. And, you know, it was a small community around here, and you couldn't really keep any secrets.
Yeah, you mentioned in your book that there was like it was like window shopping. It was like the Twitter of the day was like you talk to someone over the fence, which was pretty funny. But I also was wondering, I also was intrigued by a line in your book. You asked your mom, "Am I normal?" at 9 years old.
Yes.
How did that resonate with you?
I think because I spent my entire childhood in and out of the Children's Hospital in London, central London, and it was for psychological analysis. And after a while, you begin to think, why am I the only child that, you know, is going through this? Everyone else seems perfectly normal, again, which is from the title of the book. Everyone else seemed perfectly normal in my, you know, when I did go to school, primary school. I seemed to be the only one who, you know, was spending all of their early years having speech therapy or some kind of therapy, and after a while you just really feel like you're not the normal child at all. And that's when I remember distinctly saying to my mother, I said, you know, I actually said to her, look, am I abnormal, Mum? And she said, no, dear, of course you're not abnormal. I mean, she's not going to say, yes, you completely are. So that really pretty much gave me the title of the book, because I still feel that way. I still feel like I'm the one in the family who perhaps hasn't achieved. I come from a very high achieving family on all sides, generally speaking. And I always feel like I'm the one that, because I haven't felt normal, to use that word, you know, that I'm the one that's not very much was expected of, actually.
That was real powerful. I really felt the emotion in that answer. There was a lot of information. I loved what you said. You were in a boarding school for your middle and high school years after your longest hospital stay. What was your experience like there?
The boarding school, it was a very interesting time. It was a type of education called progressive education, which was an experiment in the sort of 40s, 50s and 60s in the UK. It was kind of a very hippie school, and yet there were people from very middle class backgrounds and not so middle class backgrounds, but it was a very eclectic group of people there. There were only 58 children in the school. And it was the first time that I was actually able to break away from my mother's influence, which is what the doctors were trying to do. It was either going to be there, or what they really wanted to do was send me to an institution for maladjusted children, which is what they said. And the famous quote from that is that the doctors, and this is when I was in the hospital, this is 1970 in the summer, and the famous quote was from the doctor to my mother was that, of course, he'll have to go to an institution and he'll probably never come out. So
God,
that sort of added to the whole idea of not being very normal. Luckily, a new psychiatrist came in just before I was due to go and said, look, there's this boarding school which we can get funding for to send him to in the countryside. And it was like landing on another planet, but it was a really special place, which I still go to. I still go down 3 or 4 times a year. It's now a center where you can learn meditation and yoga and this sort of thing. And I volunteer, and they have their own forestry and woodland and farmland. So it's still a place that's very dear to my heart. So I still go down there.
Yeah, the way you described the place, it sounded real beautiful, and I bet it has a special place in your heart. How was the transition?
Going there to start with, Ari.
To start with, how was that?
Yeah. It was very difficult. Coming from a very small sort of Jewish community in North London. We weren't Orthodox, but it was still culturally a very tight sort of group of very tight community. To going somewhere where you felt completely alien. It was a very different experience. It brought up a whole nother set of problems, which was trying to hide one's identity and feeling even more like an outsider. But it was cool. It was great. I mean, I was there for 6 years, and I had a couple of problems where people actually found out of my heritage. But apart from that, generally speaking, I had an amazing time there, an emotional time, I would say. And I hate to think what would have happened if I hadn't gone to that school.
That must be rough to think about what would have happened. I mean, had that doctor stayed there, it could have been catastrophic. This wouldn't have happened today. I guarantee it.
No.
The boarding school, you learned about instruments. How did that go?
I'd always been very passionate about music. I think it was the only thing I could really connect my emotions to from a very early age in a way that made sense. And when I went there very early on, I started to play guitar and piano, and that quickly became the only thing I was interested in, utterly obsessed by playing the guitar, and to the point where I was able not to even do any lessons after a while. The staff said, look, just spend all your time practicing the guitar. So I gave up. I didn't get any qualifications academically. So when I left school, I was actually quite good. And then I just continued that through straight into a career. I had a couple of menial jobs after I left school, but pretty quickly I was playing in jazz groups and around clubs and making a bit of money, and that gradually turned into quite a big career. Not always successful, but it had its moments.
It's crazy how things happen. How did your career progress? Were you able to dodge shady people in your career?
No, not at all. I think that the music part of the business was great. Creatively was never my problem. I think the social aspects of being in such an awful business is certainly my downfall. So I started getting into groups that were actually, we were touring quite a bit and then making records. And then we had our deal with Atlantic Records in America, in New York, which was really exciting. And then had lots of records out, had a few hits, did okay. Never quite the big one, never quite got where I wanted to get to, but it was okay. But it was never, the music was never a problem. It was always, again, the social aspects and the anxiety around the things you have to do, the networking, and perhaps being a certain type of person, which, I'm not very good at faking being a certain type of person. I only know one way to be, and it's so it didn't always work in that industry.
Yeah, I completely would understand if record companies are being cutthroat and then you get involved in stuff that you never wanted to get involved in. How did you break into the ad industry?
It was complete luck, Ari, actually. I was in my recording studio one day up in North London, and this would have been about 2004, and I was getting pretty tired of the record side of the industry, but I was still doing a bit of recording for people, and someone came in to play some blues harmonica one day, which I wrote about in the book. And it was just a paid session. He paid me for a few hours just to record some blues songs. So we did that, and we got talking, and I said, "Oh, what do you do?" He said, this is a harmonica player. He said, "Oh, I'm the creative director of this big advertising agency in London. It was called Dynamo, then Wax. It's actually something else now." But he said, "Would you, by any chance fancy doing a bit of music for us sometime?" I said, "Yeah, sure." Didn't expect to hear anything back. And the following week, he called me and said, "Look, we've got some music for, I don't know if you have Heinz over there. They make like beans and Heinz."
Yeah, we have that. I think it's Kraft Heinz. Yeah, Kraft Heinz.
Right. So he said, "Look, one of our clients is Heinz. Can you do some music for a radio ad?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And it's fantastic. So I did it. I got paid straight away, which is really unusual for the music industry. Advertising, they just pay you when you've done. This is fantastic. I did 2 for them, and then he had me do something for TV ad for Paramount Films. A few weeks later, then it was going on and on and on, and suddenly I'm in the advertising business. So it's complete fluke. Then I started getting into a bit of video editing and stuff, and he said, "Look, do you want to be our video freelancer as well?" And I thought, this is really weird, because I didn't really know what I was doing at all. But
neither do I, but I do make good videos, so.
Well, it was a complete fluke. So the first job they gave me, I'd done quite a few bits and pieces of music videos at that point, filming and editing. He said, "Look, we've got a little job for you to do, but it's in, what was the first one? Paris." I said, "Sure." It was for Danone. They're quite big. They make, it's Danone, Danone. They make yogurts.
They call it here.
Yeah,
they call it Danone here.
Yeah. So I thought, this can't be real. So we went off and did that. And then a few weeks later, we went to Belgium and did another one. And all the time, I was just getting cemented into this career that was complete fluke. And I still don't know why. I think he hired me because he liked me. I think we just got on well. And it showed me the power of relationships, I think, more than anything. But I always felt such a fish out of water. I really didn't feel like I was getting a bit old, and all the freelancers that worked there were these trendy young things, and I thought, I really don't belong here, But just something in me made me do it. I think for all of my emotional and mental health and developmental problems, there's still a very ambitious part to my nature which pulls me through at the worst of times.
Wow, so that must have been real crazy. Can you elaborate on how you were a fish out of water?
I think growing up from the start I think from that grew this huge amount of low self-esteem and lack of confidence. And I tend to go into every venture feeling like it's about to fail, but I go ahead and do it anyway and just pretend.
And you just succeed. You just pretend and you succeed. That's literally my whole life. That's literally my whole life.
Yeah, and I know that
I know
I think probably most people have a degree of what's the word?
They act like they know what they're doing, but they really don't. But it still comes out nice.
Yeah, imposter syndrome. That's the thing.
Yeah.
But it just makes life a nightmare, though, and you never really feel comfortable in your skin. And
I mean, I can't even believe I have a radio show right now.
Well, I think it's very brave of you, actually, because you are putting yourself out there, and I think it's a really brave thing of you to do.
Yeah,
actually.
I think it is. I mean, who am I to talk about myself? What led you to the doctor who ultimately diagnosed you with your condition, autism?
Well, all through my recording years and my years in advertising, doing all the big things I was doing and the record deals and everything else, I was really the depression was always pretty intense, which another reason why I didn't quite get to where I needed to get in my career. Just emotionally, I was just a complete mess, but somehow fought my way through. But around 2008, a lot of things began to happen. I think I probably really hit the wall in terms of the depression and the anxiety, and it culminated in the doctor sending me for some therapy from CBT, actually.
Cognitive behavior therapy. I want to clear that up so no one takes it the wrong way.
Yeah, it's cognitive behavioral therapy, yeah. And I went for the initial assessment, and after about 10 minutes, the doctor said to me, the psychologist said to me, have you ever heard of high-functioning autism? I said, no. She said, well, I think you may have it. She said, everything. So she began to describe what high-functioning autism was, or autism was, as it related to me. And I thought, oh my God, that's me.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy how it just happens like that. Now, you mentioned earlier that your mother died a few months or so after your diagnosis. Did she ever find out about your diagnosis?
Yes. Because she had to spend, part of the diagnostic process is that they have to speak to your mother to get the early childhood development history. And it was about only 3 or 4 months before that happened when the psychologist spent a few hours on the phone to my mum, and that helped the diagnosis move along. And when I got my diagnosis, I mentioned to my mum, and there was a distinct lack of interest. I think my childhood had been so incredibly traumatic for everybody concerned. I mean, I may be underplaying it a little in my book and here, but it was an incredibly traumatic thing for everybody involved. I think when you have a child who has he's got a constantly difficult emotional process they're going through. I think it's difficult for any parent, and I think she was hoping that I'd perhaps we could forget about all of that stuff now, but to have it all brought up again, I think it was a mixture of embarrassment and just not wanting to go rake back over the same old ground we'd been through. So there was not a huge amount of response from her.
That was real powerful. I mean,
thank you.
I have no words, actually, based on what you just said. What questions did your autism diagnosis answer, and what did it raise and leave unanswered?
I think it raised as many questions as things were answered. And it still does in a way. I think the stuff around social anxiety, you could have social anxiety obviously without autism, but I think the difficulty I had around relationships and not really quite knowing what people are about, I think that I could see how my career and life and everything had been quite disabled by my inability to really have that social imagination around people and really get an idea of what they were about. So I could see why I'd fallen into so many bad business relationships, because I didn't everyone else could see that it was a really bad idea to work with that person, but I couldn't see it. I thought, oh no, I'm sure they're a lovely person. And it's this naivety with not having a social imagination, which is one of the, the sort of fundamental communication difficulties with autism. And also the information processing, information. That has always been the most horrendous, possibly the most disabling aspect of where I am with autism is the information processing. It can be speech, it can be what people say, it can be getting lost on roads I've driven down 1,000 times, and you feel like such a fool. You feel like you can't quite grow up because you keep making the same mistakes with things over and over again. All of these things now had a reason.
I'm crying right now.
Oh, please don't cry, Harry.
I'm crying. This is real powerful. I never thought I would be crying on an interview. I thought it would be all happy. And but that's what I want. I want the emotion. I want the emotion in the interview.
Yeah.
You have a supportive family. How was your father an ally after your diagnosis?
Well, so after the diagnosis, then there was this thing where I gave up music, I gave up my career, I had the diagnosis, and my mother died all in the space of about 5 months. So it was a really big year. I mean, the wheels really came off the bus, and I was on all sorts of medication, blah, blah, blah. And so for the first time, I actually sat down with my father and told him. Remember, and it's actually the very first part in the book where I'm sitting in the cafe and Mum is at a place where she's not going to come out of the hospital ever. You sort of get to the point when you know, and there's an honesty that happens with people in certain times like that, where it's almost like the ego goes and the barriers come down, and there's moments in your life where you can be very honest, and childbirth and deaths are those moments. And I opened up to him, and he said, well, but you can't be autistic. He said you're so clever. He said, look at all of these things you can do. And then I had to explain the whole thing, and I didn't know enough about autism. And I said, well, Dad, I'm always getting lost on the road, or if I'm going somewhere, I'm always getting lost. He said, well, everyone gets lost. And I had this whole list. I didn't have enough knowledge of autism to explain to him, but after a while, he began to open up to me about some of his issues as a child, severely dyslexic. And it turns out, and, many people in my family on that side had suffered greatly from depression, which is the mental health side of things. Perhaps not autism, but there is some evidence of autism in the family, even though they may not call it that. I think as a child, I never had that sort of relationship with him where I could open up and be honest. I felt quite embarrassed in front of him, but now, he's still alive, bless him. He's 89, and he's actually really quite accepting, and I don't really even bring autism up anymore. I've sort of been there and done it a little bit. But he's more inclined to bring it up. And he said, now, Stephen, having autism, does it mean... I said, Dad, yeah, okay. And now it's like, he's very open. And I think I had to go through this thing where I had to get it out into the open, where everybody knew. Now everybody knows, and I feel like I don't need to talk about it with the family anymore.
I'd like to ask you why you started adultswithautism.org.uk.
Well, when I had my diagnosis in 2008, me being Mr. Obsessive Researcher, you get on Google. I think we had Google in 2008, or whatever it was, and you start typing in autism, and every single article was about what to do if your child has autism. And I thought, well, surely there must be other people my age on the spectrum. I mean, if you're a child with autism, you don't suddenly disappear. or become neurotypical when you hit 18. So there was very, very little out there. So I started the website, and pretty soon I was getting some quite large numbers, and I was getting invited onto radio shows in the UK, but quite sort of like big radio shows in the UK.
Yeah.
It was like I was the only adult in the UK who apparently had autism. I'm sure there were others as well.
A quick Google search for autism even today, most of the results are images of children or children societies. I can see why you would think that and why you would have the need to create a site like that.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it is changing. But I think the aspect of autism that I was sort of aiming at were other people like me, and perhaps yourself, one day. And, that there's a lot of people of older people on the spectrum who have professional careers. They may be married and they'll have a mortgage and they'll have kids, yet they're autistic. They have these difficulties, and it's almost like I wouldn't say a movement. It's like a gradual awakening to the fact that there is this huge part of this huge group of people who are sort of almost coming out and owning that space of being professional people that have autism. They can continue to become successful, but they still have specific difficulties that make some things very difficult in life. And
I do know a lot of people that have trouble.
Yes.
In this, I'm not going to bring up names, but I do know people that probably won't live independently in their life, and it's sad to see. But I hope that I can live independently one day.
Yes, well, absolutely, Ari. And I think one of the pitfalls of being in this place where you're expected to live independently, but you're still on the spectrum, it brings an awful lot of
stress and anxiety.
Anxiety, absolutely. Anxiety and depression, and feeling like you're not quite good enough and you can only just about survive in that world. And the anxiety I really see are often people that are able to sort of function independently, and the struggles they have in the world, trying to make their way with the difficulties that they have. And I've been trying to sort of campaign for better mental health understanding, understanding of mental health of people on the spectrum for years now. This is one of my big sort of things that I've been going on about for a while now. And gradually it's beginning to happen, but there's still a lack of understanding. Because once you've had an autism diagnosis, many people think that every problem you have is because you're autistic, and it's not. It's because you've also got huge amounts of anxiety and OCD and depression, and they are things that can be improved. You're always going to have those developmental things. You're always going to have the autism, but you have some control over your mental health. You don't have you have control over how much anxiety you have and depression. Those are things that can be dealt with if you get the right help.
Wow. I have no words again. I want to ask you a few reflection questions. And I wanted to know, I have a couple, and I wanted to know, do you feel that your autism was responsible for your success and creativity in advertising and the visual and performing arts?
Gosh. It helped with some things, with my attention to detail and the fact that I would still be sitting there in this recording studio at 6 o'clock in the morning trying to perfect something that when everyone else was falling asleep, but I couldn't leave until that thing was done. There's aspects of it that yeah, there's aspects of my version of autism that has been beneficial. I'm not sure that overall it's been beneficial. But then I think, do you know, Ari, I've come to the conclusion that autism is not my biggest drawback in life.
Really?
I tend to think that there are more positives that have come from being on the spectrum. My problems are the associated mental health conditions, the depression, anxiety, and OCD that are driven by having autism.
I could say the same about myself.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who was just diagnosed or just found out about their diagnosis?
So what advice would I give? I think really try and get to understand as much about autism as you can, but also get to understand how you're affected by autism, because your experience is going to be unique. So I think understanding autism is to understand yourself. Once you've understood all the sort of technical aspects of why you were diagnosed, then you begin to look at yourself, Ari, and you say, what does this really mean for me? What is it that gives me problems about this, or what is it that gives me benefits? In what way am I a better person for having this? If you, and I think you get to a point where self-reflection, meditation, go off into the mountains and find yourself. It really is about self-reflection, self-awareness.
I can see that. And it's not just cliche, it's true. Do you have any last words to give to our audience before we end?
I think having ambition for yourself is really important in whatever form that takes. It doesn't necessarily have to be becoming super successful in anything, but they could be personal goals. But I think waking up every day with some sort of ambition, even if it's to speak to someone that you're a little bit scared of speaking to, or learning something new, a language or a musical instrument. I think it's so important for us to always be moving forward in some way and just striving just a little bit at the edge of your safety zone, just to try and expand your world a bit more every day.
Wow, that I completely can agree with. Where can someone buy your books?
Okay, well, they're both on Amazon. They're also on Kobo, Barnes and Noble, iBooks,
Apple Books, I believe. I forgot even what it's called myself.
Yeah, Apple Books. Yeah, Google.
Google
Kobo
Play
was a
Books.
good one.
Google Play Books.
Yeah.
So anywhere really that people go these days. And where can someone find out more about you or reach out to you?
Yeah, they can contact me through the website. It's adultswithautism.org.uk.
You were an amazing guest to interview, and you revealed so much interesting information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ari. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.